Okay, wrestling fans, it's Mike Messier, Hollywood Blondes. For some reason, I want to talk about the Hollywood Blondes tonight. 1993 was kind of a tough year in a lot of ways for WCW, although they did get Ric Flair back in February. Now, also, that same night that Ric Flair came back, which was Super Brawl 3, Asheville, North Carolina, one of the opening matches was a tag team match. It was Steve Austin and Flying Brian Pillman. And I was actually there for that match. And they teamed up, I want to say, against Buff Bagwell and Tom Zank, or it might have been Eric Watts or Johnny Gunn. But honestly, I remember that Pillman and Austin, had a really solid, 10 or 15 minute tag team match. They won the match. Interestingly enough, the tag team champions of Shane Douglas and Ricky Steamboat were not on that card, which is always kind of striking as weird to me. They did have that Smoky Mountain tag team match, but I've done another video about Super Brawl 3. But that was when you started seeing Pillman and Austin team up. Now, there is a very obscure interview from a WCW Saturday Night show where Barry Windham actually seems to negotiate the Hollywood Blondes coming together as a tag team. Windham had been teaming with Brian Pillman himself, which was very interesting. At the time, 1992 WCW gets a lot of disservice from the podcast world because it's the Bill Watts or Ole Anderson was booking. Eric Bischoff hadn't stepped in yet. Flair was not with the company. He was with WWF at the time. But I'm telling you, 1992 WCW, I think it gets a bad rap because you had some guys like Big Van Vader in the world title scene with Sting and Ron Simmons. You had the NWA world title, which it does get confusing a bit. That was restarted around August or September of 92. Going into 93, you had guys like Masahiro, I believe Masachono, Great Muta, Barry Windham, all had that NWA title, that reboot. Meanwhile, like I said, Vader, Sting, Ron Simmons were kind of trading that world title. In the tag team scene, you had Shane Douglas and Ricky Steamboat. They won the belts from Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes around October, November of 92. It was kind of an interesting babyface match, but Barry Windham turned heel. He brought in Brian Pillman. If you want to see some good wrestling, go to Starrcade 92. Barry Windham and Brian Pillman teaming up. And then when they decided to go with Windham as a single for this NWA World title run in preparation for Flair coming back, and we all know what happened there, or if you don't, look into that, that's when the Hollywood Blondes came together. Because Barry Windham did this interview. He said, I'm going to pursue the singles championships, and I'm going to introduce this Brian Pillman to this Steve Austin, and this is a man that he can trust. And it was almost like Windham was negotiating his own little heel tandem. And I always thought that I thought a good Hollywood horseman, as I called it, would have been an all-heel horseman with Barry Windham, Steve Austin, Flying Brian Pillman, and the fourth guy I always thought would be cool would be Lex Luger, believe it or not. Luger, Windham, Austin, and Pillman. Now, the problem was, so to speak, that Luger was deep into his WWF run, so he wasn't available for that. Now we talk about the Hollywood Blondes, what really happened. Eventually they just kept fighting, and eventually got those tag belts off of Douglas and Steamboat. I think it was on a WCW Worldwide show, which I didn't see at the time. And I remember just when the Blondes started walking around with those belts, they started doing these Brush with Greatness tour matches. Now, that gets kind of forgotten about, but the Brush with Greatness tour was when Pillman and Austin would come to the ring and they'd kind of run these movie cameras. I can't do it with one hand for crying out loud, but they'd run like a little movie camera thing, and they would wrestle these jabronis, these jobbers, these, WCW Saturday Night Prelim guys, and they beat the crap out of them, but it was all under the auspices of the Brush with Greatness tour, which was that they were giving the low-life jobber wrestlers on WCW Saturday Night a brush with greatness, with them, basically, with Austin and Pillman. I always thought that was fun because so many times back in the day especially, not so much anymore, you'd see all these jobber matches, and there was, it's just fodder. It's just something to watch. You get to see your top guy do all his good moves. You see him beat somebody in 2 or 3 minutes, and that's it. But with these Brush with Greatness tour, It actually gave like a scheme or a template or a rhyme and a reason to these otherwise preliminary matches. Around the same time, Pillman and Austin started coming out with their custom-made little outfits, and if you have those action figures of the Hollywood Blondes, Pillman and Austin, they had like these custom-made, silver or black. I think they had two sets. They had the silver, and they had the black of their vests and everything. And of course, Austin would tell the story of how Pillman bought him a nice gold chain as a gift, and or I think it was a cross on a chain, and Austin still has that. Pillman was just a fascinating guy, and it's just, we're about a week away, a week past Pillman's anniversary of his death. October 5th, 1997, was when his remains are discovered in that hotel, and we talk about the anniversary of the Hell in the Cell, the original, Shawn Michaels Undertaker Hell in the Cell. That was the same day that Pillman was discovered dead. So it's always been very fascinating to me, that Pillman, was discovered dead the same day the same night that the Hell in the Cell debuted. I always find that to be an interesting wrestling fact, that we've had the Hell in the Cell match as long as we haven't had Pillman. Great. Unfortunately, the Hollywood Blondes were kind of short-lived. The way that those guys told the story, I think Austin's told it many times, that they felt like they were getting too popular and the promotion shut them down, which, it happens in wrestling. I mean, even now, 4 or 5 years ago, there was the wrestler in WWF, the guy that impersonated The Miz, Damian Sandow. He was getting too popular, so they fired him. At least that's the way it seemed. Or a guy like Woo 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 guy, the New Jersey guy. So it makes very little rhyme or reason sometimes. But you talk about the Flair for the Gold, where Austin and Pillman mocked Arn and Flair and made fun of them, and then they had that Clash of the Champions match, which was Flair's first match back. That was Clash of Champions, I want to say June of '93, if people can find that. 2 out of 3 falls match. I won't give away the results. A really good couple of matches that you can find for the Hollywood Blondes. I mean, you can YouTube this stuff. It's on the WWE Network, I'm sure. But Pillman and Austin versus Douglas and Steamboat at Slamboree '93, which I do think is an underrated pay-per-view. It was actually a tag team cage match, and I won't give away the results there either. The way that these guys lost the belts, Clash of the Champions, I want to say September of '93, and it was really kind of crappy that the way the Blondes kind of had a 2-part going out process. It's 4:19 in the morning, by the way. The way that the Blondes lost the belts, Pillman was injured. I think he had a leg problem, and they replaced him with Steven Regal. Now, this was bad on many, many reasons. Not because anything wrong with Regal, but Regal was just getting some momentum as a singles guy, and to kind of shoehorn him into a tag team match where he and Austin lost these tag team belts, and I don't remember who got pinned, if it was Austin or Regal, but they lost to Paul Roma and Arn Anderson, and it was just a bad chemistry for a match. And all those guys can handle a tag team match. I mean, those are 4 of the consummate professionals. Yes, Paul Roma too, great tag team wrestler. But just a bad chemistry, definitely missing something without Pillman's appeal in there. Why was Pillman so great with the Hollywood Blondes especially? Really a time where Brian Pillman kind of mentored Steve Austin in interviews and promos and building up his confidence. I mean, I think Steve Austin would be the first one to say that Brian Pillman and Paul Heyman were probably the 2 biggest contributors to the modern day Steve Austin having that confidence to become Austin 316 as we know him. Moving forth, the Hollywood Blondes did do an angle after that, a couple of angles. One of them apparently was with the Nasty Boys, which is really weird to me because I don't remember this ever being on TV, but it's now on YouTube. I think it was one of those angles that they taped but didn't air, or maybe they did air it, I just never saw it. But they did this whole thing with the Nasty Boys somehow beat Arn and Roma for the belts, and the Blondes claimed that those guys won the belts for them, and they were going to give them back the belts. That the Nasty Boys were supposed to hand over the belts. Of course, the Nasty Boys with Missy Hyatt didn't want to hand them the belts, so they had a conflict. And it looked like they were headed for a really cool heel versus heel feud. The Nasty Boys with Missy Hyatt versus the Hollywood Blondes. You think that maybe Missy would turn, go with the Blondes at some point. That would be a more natural fit in some ways. But that, I don't remember that ever airing, and if it did, I don't think they ever had a match for that. Instead, what I remember is Pillman and Austin wrestling each other because Colonel Rob Parker wanted to manage Steve Austin and not Brian Pillman. And of course, Pillman assumed that Austin would back him up, meaning Pillman, but Austin thought, no, I would like to be managed by Colonel Rob. So they had a feud, they had a bunch of Clash of Champions, Pillman turned back babyface, and then you had a couple of years of like Pillman kind of fluctuating around and, just going from heel to face, kind of never really knowing where he stood in anything. Meanwhile, Austin, of course, was eventually let go. I think late 94, maybe early 95 of WCW, ended up in ECW, and of course the rest is fucking history. But Pillman stuck around with WCW for a few more years. And it wasn't until I think WrestleMania 12 that Pillman did some type of press conference thing, and they were off to the races. And you never had Pillman and Austin team up in WWF. Instead, you had them wrestling each other. That famous angle where, Pillman got his foot crunched by Austin, and then the next famous angle, Pillman 9mm. Trying to think if I'm forgetting anything about Hollywood Blondes. It's almost like a cult thing. Like if you really knew wrestling, you really liked the Hollywood Blondes, and then for years later, even this shirt. I mean, and there also have to say that there was other Hollywood Blonde tag teams. I think it was, I want to say Buddy Jack Roberts or Buddy Roberts from the Freebirds, and I want to say Jerry. Man, I don't want to mess up the guy's name, but was it Jerry Oates, if I'm getting that right, or Ted Oates? Buddy Roberts and the guy, I want to say Jerry Oates, but I apologize if I have that wrong, or Ted Oates, were the Hollywood Blondes, and they spelled it differently, like without the E. And then there was another version in like 1984, the dying days of Georgia Championship Wrestling, like 6 months or a year before they went out of business. It was Hustler Rip Rogers with a very beautiful blonde valet, and I think it was Ted Oates, actually. But I'm trying to think of who Buddy Roberts teamed up with for his Hollywood Blondes. So there was other incarnations of the Hollywood Blondes. It would be a really cool tag team name for a women's tag team. I mean, the beautiful people of Angelina Sky and, Velvet Sky and Angelina Love. They could have been a Hollywood Blondes team. You could do something now with, say, Lana and Carmella. Could be a Hollywood, if Carmella would go back to being a blonde. Not to feminize everything. I'm not Stephanie McMahon over here. A real interesting person who really supported the Pillman Austin Hollywood Blondes was none other than Shane Douglas. Shane Douglas was a big Hollywood Blondes fan and would do the video thing, the camera thing to his father, Vince. And apparently, at least Shane McMahon tells that story, that they would watch WCW to kind of, steal their talent, and that Shane was always pushing for the Hollywood Blondes. So on and so forth, so on and so forth. Once again, Slamboree 93, your cage match against, Steamboat and Douglas, but it wasn't really Douglas, so I'll let you find out. They also had a lot of great matches on WCW Saturday Night. If you dig around, like that early, say, February to June 93, WCW Saturday Night, if those are on the network, you can find some good Hollywood Blonde stuff. The Clash of the Champions, like I said, June of 93. Unfortunately, and you can find the Pillman versus Austin matches, that clash maybe, God, when would that clash have been? November of 93 or some such thing? Or even into 94, because I think they feuded in 94. Hollywood fucking Blondes, and what about that? It was just a certain spark, a certain chemistry, a certain savoir-faire, and that type of thing it's hard to put words on because you just have to watch these guys. But you had the muscle, you had the Stone Cold. He wasn't even Steve Austin Stone Cold yet. He was stunning Steve Austin. Still had the blonde hair, the '90s haircut. And then you had Pillman, and Pillman was really coming into his own as what we came to know as the loose cannon. So I just recommend the Hollywood Blondes.